The sun blazed mercilessly over the Mojave Desert as Preston Anders spotted what he thought was a mirage shimmering in the distance, but the desperate, keening cry that carried across the wasteland was all too real. It was July of 1882, and Preston had been riding alone for 3 days straight from his family's ranch outside of Barstow, heading toward the silver mining town of Calico, California, with supplies and news for his brother who worked the claims there. The heat had been brutal, even for summer in the desert, and he had been careful to ration his water and rest his horse in whatever shade he could find. But as he crested another rocky rise, he saw her, a woman in a dusty blue dress kneeling beside a fallen bay horse, her bonnet hanging down her back by its strings, her dark auburn hair gleaming copper in the relentless sunlight. Preston urged his buckskin gelding forward, his heart hammering as he took in the scene. The woman was pouring water from a nearly empty canteen into her cupped palm, trying to get her horse to drink. The animal was on its side, flanks heaving, foam around its mouth, clearly suffering from heat exhaustion or worse. The woman herself looked barely better. Her face flushed dangerously red, her lips cracked and bleeding, her hands trembling as she tried again and again to revive her dying horse. "Madam," Preston called out, dismounting quickly and grabbing his own full canteen from his saddle. "Madam, you need water more than that horse does right now." She looked up at him with eyes the color of spring grass, so startling and beautiful that for a moment he forgot the urgency of the situation. Her face was streaked with dust and tears, and she shook her head stubbornly. "He saved my life getting me this far. I will not abandon him to die of thirst." "You are both going to die if you do not let me help you," Preston said firmly, kneeling beside her. He could see now that she was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, and even in her desperate state there was a fierce determination in her features that commanded respect. "Please drink first, then we will see to your horse." She hesitated, looking between him and her fallen animal, and Preston made the decision for her. He pressed his canteen to her lips and tipped it gently. "Drink. That is an order." The cool water seemed to revive something in her, and she drank deeply, coughing a little as it went down too fast. Preston pulled the canteen back. "Slowly now. Your body needs time to adjust." While she caught her breath, Preston moved to examine her horse. The bay was in bad shape, but his eyes were still alert, and when Preston ran his hand along the animal's neck, he could feel the muscles twitch in response. "He's not dead yet." "When did he go down?" "About an hour ago," the woman said, her voice hoarse despite the water. "We have been traveling for 2 days. I thought I had enough water, but I miscalculated. The sun, it is so much hotter than I expected, and I got turned around. I was trying to reach Calico." Preston nodded, his mind working quickly. "Calico is still about 8 miles northeast. Your horse has heat exhaustion, but if we can cool him down and get some water in him, he might make it." He looked at her seriously. "But I need you to be strong enough to help me. Can you do that?" She nodded, taking another careful sip from his canteen. "Yes, tell me what to do." "What is your name?" Preston asked as he pulled off his bandana and soaked it with water from his second canteen, the one he kept for his own horse. "Hannah Armstrong," she said, and despite everything, she managed a weak smile. "And you are my guardian angel, I suppose." "Preston Anders, and I am no angel, just a rancher who happened to be riding through at the right time." He handed her the wet bandana. "Put this on the back of your neck. It will help cool you down. I am going to work on your horse." Preston had grown up around horses his entire life. His father had taught him and his 3 brothers everything about caring for the animals, from birthing foals to treating colic to dealing with injuries. He had seen heat exhaustion before, and he knew that timing was everything. He pulled off his hat and filled it with water from his canteen, then carefully lifted the bay's head and let the water trickle into its mouth. The horse's tongue moved weakly, and some of the water went down. "Good boy," Preston murmured. "That is it. Just a little at a time." Hannah had moved closer, and together they worked in tandem. Preston continued giving the horse small amounts of water while Hannah used the wet bandana to cool the animal's head and neck. After several long minutes, the bay's breathing began to even out and his eyes looked more focused. "He is coming around," Preston said with relief. "But he is not going to be able to carry you anywhere for a while. We need to get him on his feet and into some shade. There is an outcropping of rocks about a quarter-mile back that will provide shelter. Do you think you can walk that far?" Hannah nodded, getting to her feet with visible effort. Her legs were shaky, but she stood firm. "I can walk to China if it means saving Thunder. He is all I have left." There was a story in those words, Preston knew, but this was not the time to ask. Together they coaxed Thunder to his feet. The horse staggered but stayed upright, and slowly, painfully slowly, they made their way toward the rocky shelter Preston had spotted earlier. By the time they reached the shade, the sun had moved slightly westward, offering a bit of respite from the worst of the heat. Preston's own horse, a steady gelding named Copper, followed along patiently, well-trained and calm even in the difficult conditions. Preston tied both horses in the shade and made sure they each had water from his supplies. He had been carrying extra for this trip, knowing the desert crossing could be treacherous, but he had not expected to be sharing it like this. Hannah sank down onto a flat rock, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Now that the immediate crisis was passing, Preston could see just how worn out she truly was. Her dress was torn in places, her hands were blistered, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of more than just 2 days of hard travel. "When did you last eat?" Preston asked, digging into his saddlebags for the dried beef and hardtack he had packed. "Yesterday morning, I think," Hannah said, pressing her hands to her face. "I had some supplies, but my pack horse spooked 3 days ago and ran off with most of my food and water. I have been trying to make do with what I had in my saddlebags, but it was not enough." Preston handed her some of the dried beef and a piece of hardtack. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will rebel if you take too much too fast." They sat in silence for a while, both of them eating and drinking, letting their bodies recover. Preston found himself watching Hannah when he thought she was not looking. Even exhausted and disheveled, there was something compelling about her. It was not just her unusual green eyes or the way the sunlight caught the red in her hair. It was the set of her jaw, the way she had refused to abandon her horse even when it might have meant her own death, the quiet strength that radiated from her despite her obvious vulnerability. "You said Thunder is all you have left," Preston finally said, keeping his voice gentle. "Do you have family in Calico?" Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert landscape. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "I had an uncle there. He wrote to me 6 months ago, said there were opportunities in Calico, that the silver boom meant jobs even for women. I was working in a laundry in San Francisco, barely making enough to eat, and his letters made it sound like a new start." She swallowed hard. "But when I arrived at the stagecoach stop in Daggett 2 days ago, there was a telegram waiting. My uncle died of pneumonia 3 weeks ago. I had already sold everything I owned to pay for the journey. I had nowhere else to go, so I thought perhaps I could still find work in Calico, but then I got lost and ran out of water." The matter-of-fact way she said it, as if reciting a grocery list rather than describing the collapse of her entire world, made Preston's chest tighten. "I am sorry about your uncle," he said quietly, "but you are not alone now. I will make sure you get to Calico safely, and I will help you find work if I can. My brother knows everyone in that town." Hannah looked at him with those startling green eyes, and for the first time he saw tears gathering in them. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Preston said simply, "and because I suspect you would do the same if our situations were reversed." A tear slipped down her dusty cheek, leaving a clean trail behind it. "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You can start by resting," Preston said, standing up and stretching his stiff muscles. "We will stay here until the worst heat passes, then travel in the cooler evening. Thunder needs more time to recover, and frankly, so do you. I will keep watch." Hannah looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. She leaned back against the rock wall and closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Preston settled in to wait out the afternoon heat, checking on both horses periodically and making sure Hannah was breathing steadily. He found himself thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning he had been planning a simple supply run to Calico, expecting to spend a few days with his brother Daniel before heading back to the ranch. Now he had a responsibility to this woman, this Hannah Armstrong with her fierce spirit and her tragic circumstances. He had been alone for a long time, by choice mostly. His two older brothers were married with families, and his younger brother Daniel was too focused on making his fortune in the silver mines to think about settling down. Preston had always been the quiet one, the steady one, content to work the land and raise horses. He had loved once years ago, but Sarah Jennings had chosen a banker from Los Angeles over a simple rancher, and Preston had decided that perhaps solitude suited him better than risking his heart again. But watching Hannah sleep, seeing the way her face relaxed in rest, revealing a softness that her waking determination kept hidden, Preston felt something shift inside him. It was too soon to call it attraction, too presumptuous given the circumstances, but there was something there, a recognition of kindred spirits perhaps, or simply the beginning of respect for someone who fought as hard as she did to survive. The sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. Preston woke Hannah gently as the temperature started to drop. She stirred, looking confused for a moment before memory returned, and with it, a flash of embarrassment. "I fell asleep. I am sorry. I should have been helping." "You needed rest more than I needed help," Preston assured her. "How do you feel?" Hannah took inventory of herself, flexing her hands and rolling her shoulders. "Better. Sore and sunburned, but better." "How is Thunder?" They went to check on the horse together, and Preston was pleased to see that Thunder was standing more steadily now, his eyes alert and his breathing normal. "He is much improved. I think if we take it slow, he can make the journey to Calico, but you should ride Copper. He is well rested and can handle the extra weight." "I cannot take your horse," Hannah protested. "You have already given me so much." "I will walk and lead Thunder," Preston said firmly. "It is not up for debate. You are still recovering, and I need you to arrive in Calico on your own 2 feet, not collapsed from heat stroke." Hannah looked like she wanted to argue further, but instead she simply said, "You are a stubborn man." "Preston Anders." "I have been told that before," he replied with a slight smile, and was rewarded when Hannah smiled back. A real smile that lit up her whole face and made his heart skip in a way he had not felt in years. They packed up and set out as the evening shadows lengthened. The desert cooled quickly once the sun dipped below the horizon, and the temperature became almost pleasant. Preston walked ahead, leading Thunder by his reins, while Hannah rode Copper a few paces behind. They traveled mostly in companionable silence, saving their energy for the journey, but occasionally Hannah would ask questions about the land, or Preston would point out landmarks to help orient her. "That formation there is called Devil's Tower," Preston said, gesturing to a distinctive rock spire in the distance. "The miners use it to navigate. Once you can see that, you know Calico is less than 5 miles away." "Have you been to Calico many times?" Hannah asked. "A few dozen times over the past year," Preston said. "My brother Daniel works the Waterloo mine. It is one of the bigger claims in the area. The town has grown fast since they found silver back in 1881. Last I heard, there were close to 1,200 people living there now, maybe more." "That is larger than I expected," Hannah said. "The way my uncle described it, I thought it would be little more than a tent camp." "It was about a year ago," Preston said. "But money has a way of making towns spring up fast. There are proper buildings now, a general store, several saloons, even a school. It is rough around the edges, but it is a real town." As full darkness fell, they stopped to rest the horses and eat more of Preston's supplies. The desert night was surprisingly cold, and Hannah shivered in her thin dress. Without a word, Preston pulled his bedroll from behind Copper's saddle and draped it around her shoulders. "You will freeze," Hannah protested weakly, but she pulled the blanket tighter anyway. I have my jacket, and I'm used to cold nights, Preston said. Besides, we will be in Calico in another few hours. The Silver Spur Hotel should have rooms available. You can get a proper rest there. Hannah was quiet for a moment, then asked softly, Preston, what will I do if I cannot find work in Calico? I have less than $10 to my name. Preston had been thinking about this very question. My brother's boarding house always needs help with cooking and cleaning. The owner, Mrs. Chen, is a fair woman who pays decent wages. I will introduce you tomorrow. And if that does not work out, I know several families who might need help with children or laundry or sewing. Calico may be rough, but honest work is valued there. You make it sound so simple, Hannah said with a slight shake of her head. It is not simple, but it is possible, Preston replied. You made it this far, Hannah. You survived things that would have killed other people. Finding work in a mining town is nothing compared to what you have already done. She looked at him across the small space between them, and in the moonlight, her eyes seemed to glow. You have a lot of faith in someone you just met. I have a lot of faith in what I have seen, Preston said quietly. You chose to save your horse when most people would have saved themselves. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Hannah looked away, but Preston saw the way her hand came up to brush at her eyes. They finished their meal in silence and then continued on toward Calico. They arrived at the outskirts of town just before midnight. Calico at night was a strange sight, with oil lamps glowing in windows and the sounds of piano music and raucous laughter drifting from the saloons. Even this late, there were men moving around, miners coming off shifts or heading to them, the whole town operating on the strange schedule dictated by the mines that never truly slept. Preston led them to the Silver Spur Hotel, a 2-story wooden building that was one of the more substantial structures in town. He helped Hannah dismount, noting the way she winced as her feet hit the ground. She had to be covered in blisters and bruises, but she had not complained once during the entire journey. Wait here, Preston said, and went inside to speak with the night clerk, a thin man with spectacles who was half asleep at his desk. I need a room for the lady, Preston said, placing money on the counter. Something clean and quiet. The clerk looked at the money and then out the window at Hannah. That your wife? A friend who ran into trouble in the desert, Preston said evenly. The room? Second floor, room 7, the clerk said, handing over a key. There is a wash basin and clean linens. Tell the lady breakfast is served starting at 6 if she wants it. Preston took the key and went back outside. Hannah was leaning against Copper, clearly exhausted but trying to hide it. Come on, let me get you settled, then I will see to the horses. He led her upstairs to room 7, which was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. Hannah looked at it like it was a palace. I will bring up your saddlebags, Preston said, starting to turn away, but Hannah caught his sleeve. Preston, wait. She looked up at him, and he saw tears in her eyes again. Thank you. For everything, for saving my life and Thunder's life, and for being kind when you had no reason to be. I will find a way to repay you, I promise. Preston felt something warm bloom in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the stuffiness of the small room. You do not owe me anything, Hannah. Just promise me you will take care of yourself. Rest tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out the next steps together. Hannah nodded, and then impulsively she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. It was quick and chaste, but it sent electricity through Preston's entire body. Good night, Preston Anders. Good night, Hannah Armstrong, he managed to say. And then he fled the room before he could do something foolish like pull her into his arms and kiss her properly. Preston spent the night in the livery stable with the horses, not trusting anyone else to care for Thunder after his ordeal. He rubbed both horses down thoroughly, made sure they had feed and fresh water, and then bedded down in the hayloft. But sleep was hard to come by. He kept seeing Hannah's face, hearing her voice, feeling the ghost of her lips on his cheek. He barely knew this woman, Preston reminded himself. She had been through a terrible ordeal, and he had helped her. That was all. She was vulnerable and alone, and anything she felt toward him now was probably just gratitude. He would help her get settled in Calico, make sure she found work and had a safe place to stay, and then he would go back to his ranch and his solitary life. But even as he thought it, Preston knew he was lying to himself. Something had happened out there in the desert, something that went beyond simple rescue and gratitude. He had felt it in the way they worked together to save Thunder, in the easy silences during their journey, in the way she had looked at him in the moonlight. Preston was still wrestling with these thoughts when dawn broke over Calico, painting the rough wooden buildings in shades of pink and gold. He washed up at the pump outside the livery, changed into the clean shirt he kept in his saddlebags, and headed to the hotel dining room. Hannah was already there, sitting at a corner table with a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. She had washed and changed into what must have been her only other dress, a simple gray cotton that was clean but showed signs of much mending. Her auburn hair was pinned up neatly, and despite the sunburn across her nose and cheeks, she looked beautiful. "Good morning," Preston said, sitting down across from her. "How did you sleep?" "Like the dead," Hannah admitted. "I did not wake up until the sun was streaming through my window. How is Thunder?" "Much better. He ate well this morning and is moving around normally. A few more days of rest and he will be good as new." Preston ordered coffee and breakfast from the serving girl, then turned back to Hannah. "I was thinking we should go see Mrs. Chen this morning about that job. The boarding house is just down the street." Hannah nodded, but Preston could see the nervousness in her eyes. What if she does not want to hire me? What if I cannot find anything? "Then we will find something else," Preston said firmly. "Hannah, you have to trust that things will work out." "I am trying," she said quietly. "It is just hard when everything has gone wrong for so long." Preston reached across the table and took her hand before he could think better of it. Her fingers were small and roughened from work, but they fit perfectly in his. "Not everything has gone wrong. You survived. Thunder survived. You are here now, and I'm going to make sure you are all right, I promise." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked back up at him, there was something soft and wondering in her expression. "Why do you care so much?" Preston did not have a good answer to that, or rather, he had an answer he was not ready to say out loud. "Because someone has to," he said instead, "and I am here." They finished breakfast and walked together through the morning bustle of Calico. The town was fully awake now, with wagons rumbling down the main street, miners heading to and from the claims, and shopkeepers opening their stores for the day. Hannah stayed close to Preston's side, clearly overwhelmed by the noise and activity. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a long, low building on the east side of town. Mrs. Chen herself was a small Chinese woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened as Preston explained Hannah's situation, her gaze moving between them assessingly. "You need work. You work hard?" Mrs. Chen asked Hannah directly. "Yes, madam," Hannah said, standing up straighter. "I have been working since I was 14. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, and I learn quickly." "Many men here, they are messy, they are loud," Mrs. Chen said. "You can handle that?" "I can handle anything I need to," Hannah said firmly. Mrs. Chen looked at Preston. "You trust this woman?" "I do," Preston said without hesitation. "She has a strong character and she will not let you down." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. "Okay. I try you for 1 week. You help cook breakfast and dinner, clean rooms, wash sheets. I pay $15 a month plus a small room and meals. You work hard, you can stay. You are lazy, you go. We understand each other?" "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam," Hannah said, and Preston could hear the relief in her voice. "You start tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, Mrs. Chen said. "Today you rest, you get strong. Come back tonight, I show you the room." They left the boarding house with Hannah practically glowing with relief and happiness. "I have a job," she kept saying. "I actually have a job. And a place to live. Preston, I cannot believe it." "I told you it would work out," Preston said, feeling his own relief. He had not realized how worried he had been until the weight of it lifted. "Mrs. Chen is fair but tough. If you work hard for her, she will treat you right." "I will work harder than anyone," Hannah promised. "I am not going to waste this chance." They spent the rest of the day together, with Preston showing Hannah around Calico and introducing her to people he knew. They visited the general store where Hannah bought a few necessities with some of the money Preston insisted on loaning her despite her protests. They stopped by the Waterloo mine where Daniel worked, but he was underground and would not be up until evening. They ate lunch at a small restaurant run by a Mexican family where Hannah tried not to devour her tamales too quickly, but failed because they were so delicious after days of nothing but hardtack. All day Preston was aware of how easily they moved together, how natural it felt to walk beside her and talk about everything and nothing. Hannah had a sharp wit and a good sense of humor that came out when she was not fighting for survival. She made him laugh more than he had in months, and he found himself telling her stories about his family and the ranch that he never shared with anyone. "Your parents must be proud of you and your brothers," Hannah said as they sat on a bench outside the general store watching the town go by. "My father is dead," Preston said. "He died 5 years ago when a horse kicked him in the chest. My mother lives with my oldest brother now. She wanted me to move into the main house too, but I needed my own space. I built a cabin on the far end of the property where I can work with my horses in peace." "That must be lonely," Hannah said softly. "Sometimes," Preston admitted, "but I got used to being alone after Sarah left. It seemed safer than letting someone close again." Hannah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Who was Sarah?" Preston found himself telling her the whole story about how he and Sarah had courted for 2 years, how he had been planning to propose, how she had gone to visit family in Los Angeles and come back engaged to a banker with better prospects. "I thought I loved her," Preston said. "But looking back, I think I just loved the idea of not being alone. We were not really suited for each other." "Her loss," Hannah said firmly. "Any woman who cannot see what a good man you are is a fool." Preston looked at her, at the fierce loyalty in her green eyes, and felt his heart turn over completely. He was falling for this woman, he realized. Maybe he had been falling since the moment he saw her trying to save her dying horse. And the terrifying part was that he did not want to stop. "Hannah," he started to say, but she cut him off. "I know what you are going to say," she said quickly. "That I am just grateful, that I do not really know you, that this is all happening too fast. And maybe you are right. But Preston, I have never met anyone like you. You saved my life when you did not have to. You have been kind and patient, and you have not asked for anything in return. And I am not fool enough to think that good men like you come along every day." Preston felt like all the air had been knocked out of his lungs. "I was not going to say any of that. I was going to say that I do not want to leave Calico without you. And I know that is insane because we just met. But Hannah, I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot imagine riding back to my ranch and never seeing you again." Hannah's eyes went wide, and then a slow smile spread across her face. "Really?" "Really," Preston said, "but I do not want to rush you or pressure you. You have been through so much, and you need time to get settled here and figure out what you want. I just needed you to know how I feel." Hannah reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "What I want is to spend more time with you. What I want is to see where this goes. Is that all right?" "That is more than all right," Preston said, and then, because he could not help himself, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a promise more than a demand, and when Hannah kissed him back, Preston felt like he was flying. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "Well then," Hannah said, her cheeks flushed pink. "I suppose this means we are courting?" "I suppose it does," Preston agreed, "though this has to be the strangest courtship in history." "The best stories always are," Hannah said, and kissed him again. Preston ended up staying in Calico for 2 weeks, instead of the few days he had originally planned. He told himself it was because he needed to make sure Hannah was truly settled and safe, but the truth was he could not bring himself to leave. Every morning he would help her carry water to the boarding house before her shift started. Every evening they would have dinner together and walk through town, talking and laughing and learning everything about each other. Hannah thrived in her new position. Mrs. Chen turned out to be impressed by her work ethic and cooking skills, and by the end of the first week she had raised Hannah's pay by $2 a month. The boarders loved Hannah too, charmed by her kindness and her ability to remember how each of them liked their coffee and eggs. Daniel finally met Hannah on Preston's third day in town, and he pulled his brother aside immediately. "Are you out of your mind? You just met this woman, and you are looking at her like she hung the moon?" "Maybe I'm out of my mind," Preston said. "But Daniel, she is special. I know it in my bones." Daniel studied his younger brother, then shook his head with a reluctant smile. "I have never seen you like this, not even with Sarah. If this is what you want, then I am happy for you. But be careful, okay? You have a good heart, Preston, and I do not want to see it broken again." "I will be careful," Preston promised, but he knew it was already too late for that. His heart was wholly and completely invested in Hannah Armstrong, and there was no going back. On Preston's last night before he had to return to the ranch, he and Hannah took a long walk out to the edge of town where they could see the stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They sat together on a flat rock, Hannah leaning against Preston's shoulder, both of them quiet and content. "I do not want you to go," Hannah finally said. "I do not want to go either," Preston admitted, "but I have responsibilities at the ranch. My brothers depend on me and the horses need care. I cannot just abandon everything." "I know," Hannah said, "and I have responsibilities here now too. Mrs. Chen is depending on me, and I cannot just leave after she gave me a chance." They sat in silence for a while, both wrestling with the impossible situation. Finally, Preston said, "What if we make a plan? I will come back to visit as often as I can, at least once a month, and we will write letters in between. And when you are ready, when you feel secure and settled here, we will talk about what comes next." "What comes next?" Hannah repeated, looking up at him. Preston took a deep breath. "I am not going to lie to you, Hannah. I am in love with you. I know it is too soon and too fast, but it is the truth. And what I want, what I dream about, is you coming to live at the ranch with me as my wife. But I am not asking you that now. I am asking you to give us time to grow this thing between us, to make sure it is real and lasting. Can you do that?" Hannah's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "I am in love with you too, Preston Anders, and yes, I can do that. I want to do that." Preston kissed her then long and deep, pouring all his feelings into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I will write you every week," Preston promised, "and I will come back as soon as I can. We will make this work, Hannah. I swear it." "I believe you," Hannah said, and sealed the promise with another kiss. Preston left Calico the next morning at dawn, riding Copper with Thunder trailing behind on a lead rope. The bay had made a full recovery and was strong enough to make the journey back to the ranch. Hannah came to see him off, and they held each other for a long moment before Preston finally made himself let go and mount up. "Be safe," Hannah said, her hand on his leg. "You too," Preston said. "Take care of yourself, and give Thunder an apple every week for me." "I will," Hannah promised. "Go on now before I make a scene and embarrass us both." Preston rode away without looking back, knowing that if he did, he would never be able to leave. But as Calico disappeared behind him and the desert stretched out ahead, he felt a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the clear morning air. He was in love, truly in love, and she loved him back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next 3 months were both wonderful and torturous. Preston kept his promise and wrote to Hannah every week. Long letters full of details about the ranch and his horses and his family. Hannah wrote back just as faithfully, telling him about her work at the boarding house and the friends she was making and how much she missed him. Once a month, Preston made the journey to Calico, timing his visits so he could spend at least 2 full days with Hannah before having to turn around and head home again. Each visit, their love grew deeper and stronger. They talked about everything, their pasts and their dreams and their fears. Hannah told Preston about growing up in an orphanage after her parents died of cholera, about the years of hard work and loneliness before her uncle's letter had given her hope. Preston told Hannah about his childhood on the ranch, about his father's death and his struggle to find his place in a family of strong-willed men. By October, when the desert heat had finally broken and the nights were turning cool, Preston knew he could not wait any longer. He rode into Calico on a Friday afternoon with a plan and a ring that had belonged to his grandmother in his pocket. Hannah was in the kitchen of the boarding house when he arrived, up to her elbows in bread dough. She looked up and her whole face lit up when she saw him. "Preston, I was not expecting you until tomorrow." "I could not wait," Preston said, and pulled her into his arms despite the flour on her hands. "Hannah, we need to talk." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. "Is something wrong?" "No, everything is right. That is the problem." Preston took a deep breath. "Hannah, I have been patient. I have given us time like I promised, but I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep riding back and forth and sleeping in separate towns and living half a life. I need you with me completely and forever. Hannah Armstrong, will you marry me and come live at the ranch as my wife?" Hannah stared at him, her green eyes wide. "Preston, are you serious?" "Dead serious," Preston said, pulling out the ring. "I love you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life with you and have children with you and grow old watching sunsets from our porch. Say yes, Hannah. Please say yes." Hannah started to cry, but she was also smiling so wide it had to hurt. "Yes, yes, of course, yes. I love you, Preston. I have been ready to say yes since the first time you kissed me." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small emerald that matched her eyes, and then he kissed her right there in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, while the bread dough sat forgotten on the counter. Mrs. Chen walked in on them and cleared her throat loudly. "So, this means you are leaving me?" Hannah pulled back from Preston, looking guilty. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen, but yes, Preston and I are getting married." Mrs. Chen looked stern for a moment, then her face broke into a smile. "About time. I was wondering when that cowboy was going to make you an honest woman. You give me 2 weeks to find a replacement, then you go with blessings." They were married in early November in a simple ceremony at the small church in Calico. Daniel stood up as Preston's best man, and Mrs. Chen and several of the boarding house residents attended as witnesses. Hannah wore a new dress that she had saved up for, a deep blue silk that brought out her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Preston had picked himself that morning. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, Preston kissed Hannah like she was the air he needed to breathe, and the small congregation cheered and stomped their feet. Afterward, there was a celebration at the saloon with music and dancing and so much food that everyone complained of being stuffed. As the sun set and the party continued, Preston pulled Hannah outside into the cool night air. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Anders?" "I have been ready since the moment I met you," Hannah said, kissing him softly. "Let us go home." They traveled to the ranch the next morning, taking their time and stopping frequently to rest the horses. This time Hannah rode Thunder, who had become sleek and healthy under her care, while Preston rode Copper. They camped under the stars that night, and Preston made love to his wife for the first time in a bedroll under the vast desert sky, both of them gasping and laughing and whispering promises to each other. When they arrived at the ranch 2 days later, Preston's whole family was waiting to meet them. His mother, a small woman with silver hair and a warm smile, embraced Hannah immediately. "Welcome to the family, dear. Preston has told us so much about you in his letters." His brothers were more reserved but friendly, and their wives were genuinely welcoming. Hannah was nervous at first, but she relaxed as the day went on, and she realized that these people truly wanted her to feel at home. Preston's cabin was small but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a loft for storage. It was simply furnished but clean and comfortable, and Hannah walked through it with a growing smile on her face. "It is perfect," she declared. "It is absolutely perfect." "You can change anything you want," Preston said quickly. "Add curtains or paint or whatever makes you happy." Hannah turned to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "What makes me happy is being here with you. Everything else is just details." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Hannah took charge of the cabin and the small vegetable garden behind it, while Preston continued his work with the horses. They fell into comfortable routines, working side by side during the day, and falling into bed exhausted but happy each night. Hannah impressed everyone with her cooking skills, often preparing meals for the whole family when they gathered for Sunday dinners. She made friends with Preston's sisters-in-law and his mother, and she won over even his most skeptical brother with her willingness to help with any task, no matter how dirty or difficult. The horses loved her too. Hannah had a gentle way with the animals that reminded Preston of his father, and she spent hours in the stables helping to train the young colts and care for the mares. Thunder became something of a legend on the ranch, known for his intelligence and steady temperament, and Preston bred him to several of their best mares, hoping to pass on his good traits. By spring, Hannah was pregnant with their first child. She glowed with happiness despite the morning sickness and the swelling ankles, and Preston treated her like she was made of spun glass, hovering anxiously and trying to keep her from working too hard. "I am pregnant, not dying," Hannah finally said in exasperation after Preston tried to carry her the 10 feet from the cabin to the garden. "Preston Anders, you have to let me live my life." I know," Preston said, but he could not help worrying. He had nearly lost her once in the desert, and the thought of anything happening to her or their baby terrified him. Their son was born in late November, almost exactly a year after they had married. The birth was long and difficult, and Preston paced outside the bedroom door while his mother and the midwife helped Hannah through it. When he finally heard the baby's cry, Preston burst into tears of relief. "You can come in now," his mother called, and Preston stumbled into the room to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your son," Hannah said softly, and Preston looked down at the red-faced, squalling infant and felt his heart expand to a size he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas Preston Anders, after Hannah's father and Preston himself. Tommy, as they called him, was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed to find everything in life fascinating. Preston was completely besotted with his son, spending every spare moment holding him or playing with him or just watching him sleep. "You are hopeless," Hannah said with amusement one evening, finding Preston standing over Tommy's cradle for the 3rd time that night. "I just want to make sure he is breathing," Preston said defensively. "He is fine. Come to bed before you exhaust yourself," Hannah said, pulling him away. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter they named Eleanor after Preston's mother, and another son they called James. The cabin grew crowded, and Preston built an addition to give the children their own room. Life was busy and chaotic, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also filled with so much love and laughter that Preston could hardly believe it was his life. Hannah continued to work with the horses, often with a baby strapped to her back in the Apache style she had learned from a neighboring ranch. She taught all 3 children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, and Tommy in particular showed promise as a horseman, with his mother's gentle touch and his father's patience. On Tommy's 5th birthday, Preston gave him Thunder to be his very own horse. The boy's eyes went wide with wonder as Preston explained that Thunder had been his mother's horse, that the big bay had nearly died in the desert but had survived because Hannah loved him enough to share her last water with him. "He is a hero horse?" Tommy asked in awe. "He is," Preston confirmed, "just like your mother is a hero, and now it is your job to take care of him." Tommy threw his arms around Thunder's neck and promised to love him forever, and Preston met Hannah's eyes over their son's head. She was crying, he realized, but she was also smiling. That night after the children were asleep, Preston and Hannah sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Hannah was tucked into Preston's side, his arm around her shoulders, both of them content in the comfortable silence of long marriage. "Do you ever think about that day in the desert?" Hannah asked softly. Every day, Preston admitted. I think about what might have happened if I had taken a different route, or if I had been an hour later. I think about how close I came to never meeting you. I think about it too, Hannah said. I think about how ready I was to die out there, how I had given up hope completely. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even prayed. Preston kissed the top of her head. I think we saved each other that day. You were dying of thirst, but I was dying of loneliness. I just had not realized it yet. We have built such a good life together, Hannah said, looking out at the land they had made their home. Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I get to wake up every day with you and our children and these beautiful horses in this place. It is real, Preston promised her, and it is forever. I am never letting you go, Hannah Anders. Good, Hannah said, and kissed him. Because I am never leaving. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, they could hear thunder whinnying in the paddock and Tommy's delighted laughter as he visited his new horse one more time before bed. Eleanor was singing to herself in the cabin, making up nonsense words to a lullaby Hannah had taught her. And baby James was mercifully quiet for once, sleeping peacefully in his cradle. This was happiness, Preston thought. Not the grand sweeping romance of storybooks, but the quiet, steady joy of building a life with someone you loved more than air. It was messy and imperfect and sometimes hard, but it was theirs, earned through survival and choice, and the commitment they made to each other every single day. I love you, Preston said to Hannah, the words as necessary as breathing. I love you too, Hannah replied, as she had every day since they married, and would every day until they were old and gray, forever and always. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, Preston knew that he was the luckiest man alive. He had ridden out into the wilderness looking for nothing more than his brother, and he had found instead his whole heart, his whole life, everything that mattered. He had found Hannah. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Tommy grew into a lanky boy who was never happier than when he was working with the horses, showing the same intuitive understanding of the animals that both his parents possessed. Eleanor was fierce and fearless, always climbing trees or racing her brothers, or demanding that her father teach her to rope cattle like her uncles did. James was quieter, more thoughtful, but he had a gift for working with his hands, and spent hours helping Preston repair tack or fix fences or build new stalls. Hannah remained the heart of their family, managing the household with the same determination she had shown that day in the desert. She expanded the garden until it produced enough vegetables to feed the entire extended family, with extra to preserve for winter. She sewed all the children's clothes, often late into the night after everyone else was asleep. She helped with difficult foals and sick horses. She taught Sunday school at the little church in Barstow, and she somehow always had time to listen when one of the children had a problem or Preston had a hard day. Preston often marveled at her strength. Hannah never complained about the hard work or the isolation or the endless demands on her time. She had found her place in this world, she told him once, and she intended to defend it with everything she had. The ranch prospered under Preston and his brother's management. They had built a reputation for breeding excellent horses, steady animals with good temperaments that were perfect for ranch work or long-distance travel. Buyers came from as far away as Los Angeles and San Francisco to purchase their stock, and the family was comfortable, if not wealthy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston took Hannah back to Calico for a visit. The town had changed dramatically, growing even larger with new buildings and a proper railroad spur, but Mrs. Chen's boarding house was still there, and Mrs. Chen herself, now in her 60s but still sharp as ever, embraced Hannah like a long-lost daughter. "You look happy," Mrs. Chen said, studying Hannah's face. "That cowboy takes good care of you?" "The best care," Hannah confirmed, glancing at Preston with such love in her eyes that even Mrs. Chen looked touched. They visited Thunder's original rescue site, or as close as they could figure, and stood together in the desert heat, remembering that desperate day a decade ago. If someone had told me then that we would be here 10 years later with 3 children and a thriving ranch, I would have thought they were mad, Hannah said, shaking her head. If someone had told me I would fall in love in the span of a single day, I would have said the same, Preston replied. But here we are. Here we are, Hannah echoed, and kissed him in the same desert that had nearly killed them both. They made one more stop before leaving Calico at the small cemetery on the edge of town. Hannah laid flowers on her uncle's grave, the man she had never met but who had inadvertently given her the greatest gift of her life by luring her west. "Thank you," Hannah whispered to the simple headstone. "Thank you for the letter that brought me here. Thank you for leading me to Preston. I hope you are at peace." Preston put his arm around her shoulders as they stood in the quiet cemetery, and he sent his own silent thanks to the unknown man who had set in motion the chain of events that had brought Hannah into his life. As their children grew older, Preston and Hannah made sure to tell them the story of how they met, embellishing nothing and leaving out nothing. The children never tired of hearing about their mother's courage in sharing her last water with her dying horse, or their father's kindness in giving up his own supplies to save strangers. It became a family legend, a touchstone they returned to whenever times were hard or decisions were difficult. "Be like your mother," Preston would tell them. "Be brave and be kind, even when it costs you." "Be like your father," Hannah would say. "Be generous and be true, even when it is not convenient." The children took these lessons to heart. Tommy became a respected horse trainer, known throughout California for his skill and his fair dealings. Eleanor shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, riding alone to a one-room schoolhouse 20 miles away 3 days a week to educate the children of isolated ranchers. James took over much of the ranch management as Preston grew older, showing a head for business that complemented his practical skills. All 3 children married and had families of their own, and Preston and Hannah found themselves grandparents many times over. Their cabin had long since expanded into a proper house, with extra rooms for visiting children and grandchildren. But Preston's favorite place was still the front porch where he had spent so many evenings with Hannah over the years. As they grew older, Preston's hair went silver and Hannah's auburn locks faded to a soft gray streaked with white. Preston's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, and Hannah moved more slowly, her joints protesting the years of hard labor. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family and living in the place they loved. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 30 people now, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, all of them descended from a chance meeting in the desert 4 decades earlier. Tommy, now a grown man with silver at his own temples, stood up to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every single day. Who showed us that kindness to strangers and loyalty to family are the most important things in life. Who built something beautiful out of nothing but hard work and stubborn determination. We love you both, and we are grateful every day that you found each other." Everyone cheered and drank, and Preston pulled Hannah close, kissing her soundly despite the hoots and hollers from their grandchildren. "Still just as in love as the day I married you," Preston said against her lips. "More," Hannah corrected. "So much more." That night, after everyone had finally gone home or bedded down in guest rooms, Preston and Hannah walked out to the horse paddock one last time. Thunder had died years ago peacefully in his sleep at the remarkable age of 28, and he was buried under a cottonwood tree near the creek. But his descendants were everywhere on the ranch, strong bays and chestnuts with his steady temperament and keen intelligence. "We did it," Hannah said softly, leaning against the paddock fence. "We built a life, Preston, a real, full, beautiful life." "We did," Preston agreed, his arm around her waist, "and I would not change a single moment of it." "Not even the desert?" Hannah asked with a slight smile. not even nearly dying of thirst? Especially not the desert, Preston said firmly, because that is where I found you. That is where everything began. I would go through it all again 100 times if it meant ending up here with you. Hannah turned in his arms and looked up at him, and even with the lines of age on her face, Preston could still see the fierce young woman who had been willing to die for her horse. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Preston Anders. The absolute best thing. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Anders, Preston said, and kissed his wife under the stars. The same stars that had watched over them for 40 years and would watch over their descendants for generations to come. They stood together in the quiet night, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from a moment of crisis and kindness. Behind them, the house was full of children and grandchildren, the product of their love and their life together. Around them, the ranch stretched out in all directions, land they had worked and improved and loved into something special. And ahead of them, whatever years remained, they would face together as they always had, hand in hand and heart to heart, two souls joined by fate and choice and the unbreakable bonds of true love. Preston and Hannah lived another 10 years after that anniversary celebration, years filled with more grandchildren, more sunsets on the porch, more quiet moments of contentment. Hannah went first, peacefully in her sleep one spring morning, and Preston followed 6 months later, unable to bear being without her for long. They were buried side by side on a gentle hill overlooking the ranch, under a simple headstone that read, Preston and Hannah Anders. Beloved parents and grandparents, two souls, one heart. The entire family gathered for the funeral. 3 generations of Anders who carried forward the legacy of kindness and courage that Preston and Hannah had instilled in them. And on that grave, Tommy placed a canteen, the same battered metal canteen that Preston had used to save Hannah and Thunder in the desert so many years ago. It had been carefully preserved, a family treasure, a reminder of where they had all come from. Thank you, Tommy whispered to his parents, tears streaming down his weathered face. Thank you for finding each other. Thank you for all of this. The wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, and somewhere in the distance horses whinnied in the paddock. Life continued on the ranch, as it always had and always would, built on the foundation that two people had created from nothing but love and determination and a chance encounter in the desert. And if you listened very carefully on quiet nights, old-timers would swear you could still hear Preston and Hannah on that porch talking softly and laughing together, two spirits who had loved each other so well in life that not even death could separate them. Their story became a legend in the valley, told and retold by their descendants and anyone who knew them. The tale of the cowboy who found a woman sharing her last water with her dying horse, who saved them both with his canteen, and who found the love of his life in the process. It was a story about kindness and courage, about survival and choice, about the extraordinary things that can happen when two people find each other at exactly the right moment. And it was all true, every word of it, as true as the sunrise and the desert stars and the endless love that can exist between two people who choose each other every single day, no matter what challenges life brings. The Anders Ranch continued to thrive for generations, always known for producing the finest horses in California and for the values of hard work, integrity, and kindness that Preston and Hannah had instilled. Their children's children's children still told the story of how it all began, making sure that the legend lived on, that future generations understood what their family was built on. Because in the end, that is what love does. It creates something bigger than itself. It ripples outward through time, touching lives that will never know the original source but will benefit from its effects nonetheless. Preston and Hannah's love created a family, a legacy, a story that would be told as long as there were Anders' descendants to tell it, and somewhere beyond the veil of death. In whatever place souls go to rest, Preston and Hannah walked together still, Hand in hand under eternal stars, their love as strong and true as it had been that first day in the desert when a dying horse and a generous cowboy and a courageous woman created something beautiful from desperation and hope. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love eternal. And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.